You know, growing up, the Game Boy Advance was by far one of my favorite handheld systems. I mean, it played all the old Game Boy games as well as the newer Game Boy Advance games, and it came in a couple different form factors, with the original one being my favorite, but the SP with kind of the clamshell design and the light-up screen was pretty cool too. But there's always been one Game Boy Advance that's kind of been overlooked and sitting back in the shadows its whole life. No, really, it's under the GameCube right now. That is the GameCube Game Boy player, because occasionally I'll see it pop up online and people will talk about it, but something a lot of people haven't realized is that this is actually an entire Game Boy Advance in here, and we're gonna actually take a look at that here today. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. If you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So this was back in 2003 when Nintendo decided, hey, let's have the Game Boy Advance actually work with the GameCube in a form factor where the GameCube will sit on top of it. The only issue they ran into is they needed a way for it to actually boot these Game Boy Advance games with its own OS, and that's when they brought in that startup disc, which has actually become extremely rare now. In fact, that is the biggest problem around this device, is that it requires that startup disc if you don't want to go into the world of homebrew for the GameCube, which has led to the prices of the startup disc to go well over $150 right now online. In fact, even the Game Boy Advance player base has started to climb in price, where I've noticed it sitting between $50 and $60 pretty easily with a lot of different sold listings. And a lot of that has to do with advancements being made in kind of the homebrew field for the GameCube, to where it's pretty easy to actually start up a game here without that startup disc using something like the Game Boy interface. In fact, that's actually something I recommend using now because it has a lot of features that put it well above just the standard startup disc. But it was pretty cool when they introduced this. You could start playing your Game Boy Advance games on your TV. We had the Super Game Boy with the Super Nintendo, but this was like next level because the Game Boy Advance games on the small screen actually translated over to the TV pretty well, with a lot of our CRT TVs still not being the highest resolution, right? The Game Boy Advance games actually looked really, really good there, especially with 2D side-scrolling games like anything for the Metroid franchise or Castlevania. But I still think a lot of people bought it to this day so they could play Pokemon on their TV, because that was a big deal when Pokemon Stadium came out on the Nintendo 64, and a lot of people were playing the Game Boy Pokemon game on their TV through that. So yeah, everyone just started dropping in things like Sapphire, Ruby, Fire Red, and Leaf Green and playing it on their TV. And it also had a link cable extension, so that was pretty cool to be able to trade technically through that. Now, in order for this to work, it would actually leverage the high-speed parallel port on the bottom of the GameCube, and it wasn't something that was used really after that. I mean, we had the broadband adapter that was used down here, but this seemed to be mostly a Game Boy Advance slot for the Game Boy player. Either way though, you would lock it in, you'd screw both screws in, and then your GameCube would be like an inch taller, but much better because it could play those Game Boy Advance games. And that brings us to our Game Boy player here. From what I could tell back when it released in 2003, this launched at $50 with the Game Boy startup disc. I actually managed to find an article kind of doing a preview around this saying it was gonna launch at $49.99, which was pretty good considering it came with that startup disc and basically a Game Boy Advance that was encased in this plastic. Now, Nintendo realized they didn't need to do anything when it came to video out for it on its own, and that's why there's no other ports around here outside of the link cable port on the front, because it would rely completely on the GameCube. So controller input, having sound and audio go out, all of that would be handled by the GameCube, and this would pretty much just have to read the cartridge and figure out what's going on and send the info there. But it was a pretty cool solution at the time. I mean, I know a lot of things we see now are all emulation based. Occasionally we'll get like a nice FPGA system that comes out, but the fact that Nintendo just said, you know what, just throw an entire Game Boy Advance in there, that should take care of it. I mean, that's much better overall than what they probably could have done, especially with Game Boy Advance emulation on something like the GameCube. All right, with the top plastic off, we have a metal shielding here that's going around the board, as well as this kind of plastic here, and this is mostly just for stability. So we had stability even before the stability patches, so there you go. But this way, if you set the GameCube down, it wasn't just like hollow here, and this could kind of bend or flex in over time. Nintendo kind of thought about that a little bit and just dropped in like a plastic molding of a couple of pieces of plastic there. We have Phillips head screws all the way around here, and then we should be able to get our board out. All right, screws out, the metal comes up here. There we go. And then we have our board. It's certainly a unique looking shape for a Game Boy Advance board, obviously, but we do have our high-speed parallel port up here that feeds information to the GameCube. The link cable port is right here. And then if we flip this around, we can actually see a very familiar looking CPU staring right back at us. This is the exact same CPU that is in, say, a Game Boy Advance. Like I said, Nintendo decided, hey, we'll just drop all of that technology into an enclosed casing here that will then be designed to run up through here to that parallel port and feed the information to the GameCube that would display on screen. So we do have our CPU here. That is the ARM chipset that is used in the Game Boy Advance. It already has some VRAM built into this chip here, but on the opposite side, we do have our working DRAM here that we would have in the Game Boy Advance as well. And we can see all of the soldered pins here for the cartridge slot on this side where you would kind of pop this guy in. And with the bottom metal tray out, we can actually see the mechanism that they had installed here. This way, you wouldn't have to try to fight with the Game Boy Advance cartridge when you would insert it into the Game Boy player. So you pop that in there, and if you want to pop it out, you would be able to press this and it would knock it out of there. All of this is completely spring loaded. Now there are some projects online that I've seen where people wire up different cables to do tool assisted runs for these games, because you have a lot of different test points right here. And those will do things for like different controller inputs or even audio. Some people have actually taken audio from this board, bypass this high-speed parallel port, and run it straight up to the GameCube itself. And apparently it sounds a lot better. I haven't tried any of that myself, but there are some projects that people have talked about doing with this, even going as far as to say, hey, can we just turn this into like a console Game Boy Advance? And the only thing I can think of here is it would probably be possible because this is the entire Game Boy Advance here, but there are some roadblocks. For example, you would have to get it a power supply and you'd have to figure out how to feed it power correctly without damaging it, as it's already set up to run through that high-speed parallel port and pull power from the GameCube that it's, of course, expecting. You'd also have to figure out how to wire up a controller port for it. And after that, you'd have to make sure it can even run an OS of some kind, that being without that startup disk. I assume you could probably do something in the homebrew scene to accomplish that, but it's actually not as clear cut as people are probably thinking, which has mostly led people to using just straight up Game Boy Advance systems with things like the GBA Consolizer that I'd like to look at someday, where you take a Game Boy Advance like this and turn it into a Game Boy Advanced console. Pretty cool idea there. I think the idea was these at one point were extremely cheap, like $10, $15, even $20. Now they've climbed up in price to where it's probably not even worth buying these to rip them apart to do that, considering these are actually almost the same price as the Game Boy Advance systems now. I just think the overall solution from Nintendo for just taking a Game Boy Advance, encasing it in just like a piece of plastic, and figuring out how to make it work through that parallel port with the GameCube was a really cool idea at the time to kind of merge their handheld and their console lineup together. That way, if you just want to play the Game Boy Advance games on your TV, you would just buy the Game Boy player with the disc and be able to use all of these Game Boy Advance games on your GameCube. Much better than what they could have done, like I said, and gone somehow through the route of emulation and maybe just release different discs that they would then sell you with compilations of Game Boy Advance games. It was just a shame that they also then tied it to the software startup disc that is extremely fragile and easy to lose, as we've seen with these Game Boy player bases easily outnumbering them now in 2021. But let me know what you guys think about the Game Boy player for the GameCube. Did you get one when it came out? And are you surprised to hear that there's an entire Game Boy Advance in here to make all of that work with the GameCube? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.